Welcome to Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and you can follow me on Elon Sewer at Braden Gall.
Jesus. Mine's Erin Dugan. You can follow me on Twitter at the Erin Dugan or Instagram Erin_Dugan.
That would be Zuckerberg Sewer. Two different sewers. Get to us anywhere you want. Chris Lee on the show today from VandySports.com, Southeastern 14. Erin, you've known him as long as I've known him. I would say no human being more qualified to do a Vanderbilt State of the Union and a College World Series recap than Chris Lee.
He knows the stuff, that's for sure.
Nobody more
practice for that one.
Nobody more obsessed with college baseball. So we'll talk about sort of like what LSU's run means historically. What are the next steps for college baseball in the SEC? It's just like so utterly, completely, ridiculously dominant. Sort of like football question. Like what's next?
Yep.
TV ratings were out. Greg Sankey was out on the sewer there, spewing all the numbers. Very proud of the numbers for the TV ratings. College softball still crushing when it comes to the TV ratings. But the last two games kind of sucked, but the first game was great. But LSU is the champion. Congratulations to LSU. And I've got a couple of questions for you that we're going to get to around that. But Chris Lee is going to do most of the baseball talk and the Vandy Sports State of the Union. I do have a question today on the show. Sort of our main topic will be bust potential. You and I and Erin have talked a lot about why everyone seems so positive and happy in this conference right now. And that means someone's going to be disappointed. So we're gonna elevate a few names. Caution, beware, bust potential. Could it happen to these particular teams or programs, coaches or players? So we're gonna do that on the show today. However, I guess we got to start with. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you. Check us out, subscribe, rate, review, the whole deal. Share the product. We do appreciate you guys. Obviously, we'll start with the tragic news: Ryan Mallett passing away, drowning accident on a beach trip. It's just ridiculous. And the only thing, tragic, and I can't imagine being in the moment, like in the afternoon at 2:00 and, this kind of thing happening is just, we go to the beach all the time. You go to the beach all the time. Like just putting yourself in that situation is just insane to me.
But it's a good reason to be cautious of things that you think are just normal, like going out to a sandbar and you can sand and Ryan's very tall. I mean, Ryan was a friend, but not a close friend, but like I did know him. And I think that especially with the last 2 weeks, please have a healthy respect for the power of the ocean, because it is, we just get a little lackadaisical sometimes. You think you can stand, so everything's good. So just be careful. It's really sad.
Yeah. It's like me and my wife, our daughters go to the beach all the time and they're so comfortable in the ocean, but like you're always just like, you got to have an eye on everything. So
you should be slightly uncomfortable at all times.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is, which is basically what parenting is. Like you have a child and then you're just uncomfortable the rest of your life. 7 years in the NFL, 7th in the Heisman Trophy voting in 2010. Arkansas has only had 3 10-win seasons since joining the SEC. One of them in 2010 was Ryan Mallett. He threw for 3,800 and some change that year, 32 touchdowns, 9.4 yards per attempt. He was basically one game, Erin. I looked at the stats sort of for the Arkansas Razorback football program, and he was basically one game away, like a couple hundred yards and 2 touchdowns away from being number 1 all time in passing yards and number 1 all time in touchdowns in Arkansas history. That just just one more game, and he has both records.
And he didn't even start at Arkansas.
No, he went to Michigan, of course. And the one thing I remember the most about Ryan Mallett, not just his quality football under Bobby Petrino at Arkansas, was that like coming out of high school, I was working at Rivals, I think, when he was coming out of high school. So we were covering recruits in a much deeper way. At least I was personally. And I honestly, to me, comparing him to anybody is to me, he's Matt Stafford, or he's Matt Stafford light, because I don't think those are the 2 strongest football arms I have ever seen. Ryan Mallett, Matt Stafford, maybe Jamarcus Russell, but Mallett and Stafford, I would put as the 2 strongest football arms I've ever seen coming out of high school. And I think they came out around the same time, maybe not the same class.
That'd be right, because you and I were both working at Athlon at that time.
Well, and I just moved, so I don't know if I was. I think I have to go back and check what recruiting class he was, but when he went to Michigan, and of course he left Michigan because they hired Rich Rodriguez to run the zone read, and you don't.
You're right.
You don't run the zone read with Ryan Mallett. So, but he came down to Arkansas and put up 2 incredible seasons, and again, just tragic for the family and
for his high school team, and so had to address that, but that's sad day.
Yeah, you texted me and it was just like, what WTF, man? Like, what are we doing?
I
So
know, what a weird like couple weeks.
So I guess that means we can at least try to be positive here and congratulate LSU and the Tigers on their sixth national championship or seventh national championship, basically in like the last 30 years. They are the Alabama, I would say, probably of college baseball. Paul Skeens, Dylan Cruz, the best pitching performance we've seen, the best hitter in the game, going to be the number one pick in the draft. Chris Lee's going to talk all about this. I had a question for you though. Two questions for you. Number one, I was watching the game with my wife and my two daughters because they wanted to see the final game. And I'm watching this two teams, and it is so easy for a family of Tennessee Volunteers to pick which team we are rooting for. And I don't think it's because Tennessee and Florida has a rivalry. I mean, they do. But like objectively, not subjectively, objectively, I threw this out on Twitter. A bunch of people responded, and I was surprised that most people agreed with me on this. That okay. LSU, if you are not a fan of either team, you're a fan of another SEC team. You're a Vanderbilt person. I'm a Tennessee person. If you're an Arkansas fan, if you're a Kentucky fan, isn't objectively LSU far more likable than Florida in general?
Yeah, I think they are. Why is that? Is it just because are they just so like crazy Cajun? We don't care.
I think so.
We get excited about everything. Like join us or don't.
I think the whole vibe is fun and enjoyable, and it's a party, and the culture and the food and the people and the vibes. It's all the vibes. And Florida, I'm like, I don't know what your vibes are, man. I don't know, like what is it about Gainesville that sets you apart from every other? This is not meant to be like anti-Florida here, but come along with me, South Carolina fans. We're anti-Florida now. I think if you're a fan of one of the other 12 teams, like which team that is not your favorite team do you most like in the SEC? And to me, it's always been LSU. And a lot of it is the energy and the culture and the vibe. And like you can go get, just unbelievable food, get crazy drunk, and like get dog cussed and then like hug each other afterward. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think if there's somebody else that I could. I mean, I feel like that about Arkansas, but that's only because of Sam Pittman, probably.
Well, but Fayetteville's awesome.
Fayetteville's awesome, and it's like they're friendly when you go visit. I mean, Florida. Like if you go to Florida LSU at Florida, and see who gives you, or either school, see which fans are more friendly to you. It's almost always going to be LSU,
and it's not even like friendly necessarily. It's just not like Florida is just.
It is kind of friendly.
Like, but they're really good. Like 2 national championships in basketball under Billy Donovan. Urban Meyer with national championships. Maybe that's why I don't like him. Urban Meyer is kind of a trash human being.
Florida Mike's gonna.
No, Kevin O'Sullivan is a great coach. Like I've had beers with the guy. Like he's a great dude. I have nothing against Kevin O'Sullivan. Like the baseball program is very, very good. I love Pete Alonso as a Mets fan. I just don't. There's just nothing distinguishing to me that makes them unique. Like I don't know. Like. You know how I like Auburn. You know how I like Auburn a lot for some reason. Like I like the town. I like the vibe. I like the energy. I like how like it's just this idyllic, calm. We like Oxford, right? Like there's just places and teams that we don't mind. And as a second favorite team, I'm curious who people love and who people hate in the SEC. Like I don't expect an Ole Miss fan to ever be like, yeah, Mississippi State's my second favorite team. Like of course that's not.
No.
But I think
curious. LSU is up there.
I just felt like objectively LSU is more likable than Florida. Objectively.
I agree.
Okay. Well,
at least you're not picking on South Carolina right now.
Here's what I want from everybody. Just I want you to on the sewer machine there at Braden Gall, at the Aaron Dugan. I'd love to know what teams are like if you can't root for your favorite team in the SEC, who's the team that you most like, or the team that you most hate. And
we already know most of those, but yeah, we'll take either.
Well, but like I guess that's true because rivalries. If you're an Alabama fan, you hate Auburn. I get it. That's not what I'm trying to sort of take people away from their personal fandom and say, like, all right, step back from that. What are the teams that I just find LSU's whole energy and vibe to be very likable normally? And I get it if you're if you kind of want to
be a part of it.
If you're an A&M fan, you hate that. If you're an Arkansas fan, maybe you do hate that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making this up. Here's my last question, and we'll move on. We'll move on to football. I can't put my finger on it. Literally, my finger.
Uh-oh.
What is the difference between Dylan Cruz and Angel Reese. I just can't put my finger on what is the difference between those two.
Why are you saying physically?
Because he gets, I think he drives in some runs. He's the best player in the game. He's going to be the number 1 pick. They're up big in the national championship game. And he has the audacity and the disrespect for baseball to point to his ring finger because of the championship ring. The exact same way that the LSU women's basketball team did, the exact same way that Joe Burrow did. It's an LSU thing, and they've earned it. But I didn't see the outrage on the Twitter machine, Erin, about Dylan Cruz doing it, taunting his opponent in a championship setting.
When it's him, it's all in good fun.
The audacity. But I can't figure out what's the difference, Erin, between Dylan Cruz and the LSU women's basketball team. What can you put your finger on it? Can you put your ring finger on it?
I am not one to spoon feed. I'm just not.
Just say it out loud. She's a black woman. It's okay.
Well, she's a chick, first of all, and then also another minority that causes people to burst into flames when give all of their opinions that we don't care about.
I can't believe how disrespectful Dylan Cruz was to Florida.
Thank you for pointing that out.
And the game of baseball. That. There was zero outrage. There was no outrage, no grievance on Twitter anywhere. I couldn't believe it. I can
totally believe it. And so can you. But I appreciate you bringing this up.
See what I'm saying?
Thank you.
See what I'm saying?
Yes.
Just wanted to point that out. I think our audience has evolved enough to laugh along with us at this.
I think so. We don't have too many shitbags.
This sarcastic portion of the podcast. Okay. So let's get into some players, coaches, and teams that could disappoint, because part of the reason, and this is not, I want to be very clear to everyone that we mention here. This is not the prediction. This is not what I think is going to happen. What I am trying to figure out is who are the teams, coaches, players that are entering this season, because everyone is so happy and everyone is so at peace with what's going on in the SEC. Everyone's optimistic. Like, there's got to be someone who's going to not be as good as we expect, or not. The player's not going to be as good, or the coach is not going to be as good. And I think there's a handful of names that I would put on a list of just be careful, right? Is that a fair way to put this?
Yeah, like very much so.
At the top of the list is Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M.
Sure is.
As a coach, he's at the top of the list. Now, track record says he's going to be great. But don't tell me the volatility, and if it doesn't work, like I just, as far as new coaches go, I think Bobby Petrino's at the top of the list of be careful. Be careful.
We've talked about the dynamic of that coaching staff and discussed if it's going to work and how it will play out and the chemistry there. But outside of that, we have seen the results of the trickle down morality, attitude, honesty of coaching staff to players. And players, if your coaches are wilding out, like we've known Bobby Petrino to allegedly do, then like monkey see, monkey do. So good. I mean, you better be on your best behavior, and everything better be kept real tight, or else you may see some behavioral issues with the guys on your team.
Again, this is not our prediction. We are looking across the conference and saying,
this one might be.
Where is it? See, here's the thing. My prediction is that
I'm just kidding.
My prediction is that Bobby Petrino and Connor Wigman are going to be good at Texas A&M this year. That's my prediction.
I can't predict what he's going to do in his personal life, but I do think that I do think that A&M will be fine.
I think in the short term, they'll be great.
Right.
I don't know how long it lasts. So a couple of teams I want to throw out and see I want to see what your varying degree of reaction is to like bust potential.
Okay.
Because expectations are extremely high at Tennessee, pretty damn high at South Carolina.
Yep.
And your boy, Sam Pittman in Arkansas. This conference is so difficult. Those three teams all could be very good. They all could absolutely be 9-win teams that are very, very good. Odds are one of them does not live up to those expectations. Just statistical probability.
It's just math. Well, there's just not enough wins to be had.
Right. So I don't know who it is, But when I look at the list of expectations for teams and then try to figure out, all right, well, who could actually disappoint, who could bust, who's not going to reach those levels, you got an unproven quarterback in Joe Milton. South Carolina, Spencer Rattler still needs to be more consistent. KJ Jefferson's great, but like a lot of questions replacing two coordinators at Arkansas. Very difficult schedules for all three. Which one of those are you most concerned about?
I think, to me, there's like a difference in concern of outcome and concern of fans' expectations. I think that the hype around South Carolina and everything that's gone into that, I just don't want that fan base to get their hopes up too much. Like, I'd love to see them do well, but with like, obviously Spencer Rattler's gotten a lot of, there's obviously a lot of hype there, and a lot of it is earned, but there are a lot of factors that could make things flux one way or the other. And, is he going to be able to connect with, we've got some really good people in the wide receiver position. Are they going to be able to connect? Is there chemistry there? And then there's been a lot of hype around like the talent influx, but remembering some of those guys are young. Like, yes, like your roster's improving, but a lot of those guys are freshmen and they're young and they're new recruits, and they still have, they still have some time to they need time to figure things out, or at least get, some exposure. And then in terms of, we expect the offensive line to be improving and pass protection to be better, but that's an offensive line, like we talked about a million times, is a puzzle that has to perfectly fit together. So to me, I really hope that all these things kind of align for them and that it goes well. But any of those things could kind of set expectations high, and then it could crumble back down. And then with Tennessee, I know what you're saying in terms of Joe Milton. Obviously, we know that the guy's got an arm on him, and accuracy's been a concern, but he's got a chip on his shoulder, and that team, the past, present, future of everybody with Tennessee has rallied around him, like kind of put them in this bubble and was like, y'all can talk shit about him if you want to, but he's good. Yeah. So, I think there's probably, I don't know. I trust them more than I trust me.
That's true. Milton is a great kid though too, like just hardworking, beloved in the locker room, like really well respected young man. And that doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean he's gonna be good. I think the expectation
does mean something, but
I think the expectations for Tennessee are higher. And so if fans are expecting 10-2, then I think 8-4 is disappointing. I don't think South Carolina fans are expecting 10-2. I don't think Arkansas fans are expecting 10-2.
I think either of those that you just named would be happy at 8-4.
Yeah, so 8-4 at South Carolina, I think, is a hell of a season with their schedule.
Hell yeah.
8-4 with Arkansas, I think, is a pretty darn good season. The question is if one of them falls to 6-6, Tennessee would react the hardest because their expectations are a little bit higher.
100% agree.
But I also think Tennessee's floor is higher because I think the offense and their schedule, like they're going to beat most teams they're supposed to beat because the offense just doesn't get stopped very often. And I don't think Arkansas or South Carolina can sort of say that yet. And it doesn't mean like other teams don't belong in this conversation. Ole Miss, Kentucky, I think are two teams that you could put into this conversation. A lot of expectations for those two teams. Devin Leary, a lot of expectations from me for Devin Leary, the new quarterback, and Liam Cohen, the new / old coordinator. If they go 6-6, that's a major disappointment. And that's not out of the question for Kentucky. Ole Miss is the same way for Lane Kiffin. 6-6 would be, I think, a big disappointment for Ole Miss fans. So this is going to happen to somebody. I'm just trying to prepare people. Like, here's the other thing about Arkansas. If South Carolina and Tennessee disappoint to some degree, maybe one game, like they're 7-5, right, let's say, there is no chance Shane Beamer or Josh Heupel are on the hot seat. No chance. They've put enough equity in the bank that they would need a second bad year. If Arkansas goes 6-6, I think Sam Pittman is under pressure next season. Like, that would be 2 consecutive disappointing seasons, right? So I think that's sort of the difference. Like, they all kind of have little differences, right? And I think that's the difference with Arkansas, is that Sam's a little further along than Shane Beamer and Josh Heupel.
Agreed. And when you talk about the hot seat, well, there's some coaches that, there's all sorts of different kinds of coaches, but Sam Pittman's already putting himself on the hot seat. If we know anything about him, and you and I have, had a chance to interact with him, he is he is not too prideful to admit when something's not working. So I think if the season doesn't go the way that it's supposed to, you will not see him trying to repeat the exact same behavior the same way. You will see him making changes, even if he'll take the fall for whatever happens. He always does, but you'll see him actually trying to do things to switch it up and not being too prideful to think my way is good. It's just taking a while. I think we'll see some major changes if Arkansas doesn't get the results that they want this season.
Here's a sentence that no one's ever heard. I'm a lot like Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman's a lot like me. Transparency to a fault, I think, is one of Sam Pittman's, like, it makes him so likable and so genuine. But, like, I think you're right. If they're 3-4 or something, he's just going to come out and, like, not only is he going to protect his guys, he's going to take the blame for it and be like, this isn't working and I'm not doing a good job. And it's like, well, now you're giving the boosters an excuse to, like, have a meeting about it. You know what I mean? Like, he's almost transparent to a fault. And I'm the same way. Like, I cannot lie to anybody. I don't ever want to remember what I had to say to people. And sometimes that's used against me, like, in whatever situation. But I just, it's the way I've always functioned. And so I can't not say the honest thing out loud. Sometimes that gets me in trouble, you know. But I think Sam's that way. Like, he's just so naturally like, well, you know, the run game's not working. That's my guy. I hired him. I got to figure it out. It's my fault. And then, you know, people go on message boards and use that against him, even though he's just sort of saying what everybody already knows, you know, is happening.
Exactly.
Eli Drinkwitz, I think that thing could bottom out if Missouri. We both like Missouri, but if Missouri bottoms out, he could be in some hot seat conversations. Florida, we already talked about ad nauseum. Their kind of expectations.
Do you really think he is, or would be?
I think he's if they go 4-8, I think that's a really fascinating discussion. They've done a really good job recruiting, and they've been a better team than their preseason record every single season. But that's still only 500. So I don't know what should be expected of Missouri, honestly, with this roster quarterback situation. Like, I like them, but 7-5, 8-4 would be an extraordinary season. And they're probably going to get to 6 wins again. So what is that? That's not fireable.
No,
but it's not great. So
he has done a lot for that program, but it's at certain point, it's college football. It's relentless.
Yeah. I think, okay. The glaring one is Alabama. And if Alabama somehow falls to, like, something absurd, like 8-4, that could be a team that is very disappointing. I don't see that on their schedule. I don't see that on their roster. I don't see that with their coaching staff. They look far more like an 11-1 team than they do an 8-4 team. But if they lose 2 games again, Bama fans will be disappointed. But that's 10-2 is still a hell of a season. So I don't know what to think of Bama, like, worst case scenario, you know?
I mean, we have put Georgia at the top because they deserve to be there. And anything that happens with Bama that is 10-2 or better, I think is going to have to be okay.
What's the bus factor for LSU? Like, what happens if all of a sudden we look up and they have the same record as they did last year? They lose to Florida State in week 1. They lose to Bama on the road. They lose one other game. All of a sudden they're a 9-3 team, preseason top 10. Do LSU fans acknowledge that there's still a building process that's happening, which is clearly what they need to think?
Yeah.
Or are they already like, oh, we won the division last year, now we need to be 12-0 and making the playoff? Like, I don't know what to think of LSU fan expectations either.
I don't know if this is me being too reasonable when it comes to LSU fans. Most of my family lives in Louisiana, so I don't feel bad saying that. But I think it will matter the way that they lose. If they're losing games, I mean, that, like, last second to great teams on big plays, like, I don't think the judgment will be as hard. I mean, it'll take years off people's lives from being there and watching it on TV, but it won't look bad. I think as long as LSU is, I mean, you got to sit up pretty high. I mean, if like, what are you saying? If they win 9-3, will there be disappointment or anything below 10? It's
sort of similar to the Tennessee conversation. I don't think Tennessee fans are expecting a repeat of last year. If they are, that's irrational. I think LSU fans can expect some growth, but I think if their expectations are, all right, we won the West last year, now we need to compete for an SEC championship and get to the playoff, I think that's asking too much in year 2 of a coaching tenure that is clearly in the right trajectory. But, like, are they fully mature yet to be an 11-1 team where they can go on the road and beat Alabama, beat a top 10 Florida State team, technically kind of on the road in the bounce house, like a lot of other tough games on the schedule, Like there's so many good teams in this conference. Somebody's going to get you. Like Tennessee, I think this is why I have the under for Tennessee 9.5. This is why I'd have the under on so many like 7.5s and 8.5s in this conference. Like if I think LSU's closer to 9-3 than they are 12-0. So
and there's still, never forget that there's some luck that goes into 12-0 as well.
Oh yeah.
So everything would have to be, they're definitely moving in the right direction, but everything has to hit perfectly to end up 12-0 in the SEC.
But I think to your point about the fans, I think LSU kind of everyone I've talked to, I think kind of understands we were a little ahead of schedule last year.
Yeah.
This year, we should be a better team. It doesn't necessarily mean better record, but we're building towards a championship caliber program very soon. Right?
Agreed. Yep.
So I think LSU fans actually, shockingly, I think are pretty rational about this.
Yeah, I agree. And it doesn't really, it's not totally on brand that they would be that reasonable.
Same for Tennessee. Like,
yeah.
If Tennessee fan gets a 9-3 season, they're like, that's totally fine. That's what we expected. I'd be like, look at you guys. You're all grown up.
Just happy to be here.
Look at you guys. Otherwise, I think that's the bust potential is like Joe Milton, Devin Leary, Spencer Rattler, those three quarterbacks in the East, Bobby Petrino. Then you got, I don't think Hugh Freeze has bust potential. I think they're going to be I think they're going to show improvement right away.
Agreed.
I think as a team, it's Arkansas is the one that really concerns me. Tennessee, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Kentucky, somebody's not going to be as good as we expect. And we're trying to pinpoint those teams in June.
Ole Miss, of the ones you just named, Ole Miss fans would take it the best.
I don't know. Like after the flirtation going to Auburn, I don't know. Did Lane, as Neil said on the show, Neil McCready a couple of weeks ago on the show said they are no longer in the honeymoon phase. This is now a business relationship with Lane Kiffin. So when you flirt with Auburn that publicly, that's what happens.
This is true.
So okay, Vanderbilt State of the Union, hammer the over on the 3.5. And of course, a lot of College World Series talk with the SEC, the future of the programs, LSU championship, Florida, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi State. There's so many great baseball programs in this conference. So Chris Lee was kind enough to recap the College World Series, the NCAA tournament, where the state of baseball is in this league, and offer a fairly optimistic view of the Vanderbilt Commodores. Here was our conversation with Vandy Sports and Southeastern 14's Chris Lee. Chris, welcome to the show, my good friend. How are you, sir?
Doing well. College baseball is over, but there's never an off day in college sports anymore. It's become like the NFL, where it's 12 months a year. We're a couple of weeks out from media day, getting ready for that. And then, of course, on the baseball end, we'll have the draft. So it never ends, but it's been a lot to cover and some kind of exciting times in college sports too.
So you are one of the few people I could ever think of that I would want to put some historical context around what LSU accomplished winning the College World Series this year. Of course, you also run the Vanderbilt site as well. So we're going to talk a lot of Vandy football today in our State of the Union, but I want to talk baseball with you because you've been covering college baseball in the SEC for as long as anybody I know. And I would like to first and foremost, just I've heard a lot of hyperbole around Paul Skeen and around Dylan Cruz and around the greatest performances we've ever seen. And a lot of times we do that in the moment. And I think sometimes that's totally fair. Is it fair in this situation? Like where does those two individual performances, a pitching performance, a hitting performance, a team performance, can you try to put into context what LSU accomplished as a team this year winning the championship?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the two major players in Cruz and Skeens. It's been my opinion for a while, and I've covered SEC baseball for 20 years, and I said this a few weeks ago. I think Dylan Cruz, in terms of body of career, like if we had a war for college baseball, I think Dylan Cruz probably would have led all players who stayed for 3 years in war in the last 20 years. I feel fairly confident in that. The guy was a factor from the moment he stayed on campus. Sometimes we get into judging players for peak value and last season, and that's how we remember them. Cruz has been a stud since he got there. Jay Johnson said he's maybe the best player in the history of college baseball. I don't know that I'm qualified to say that. If you want to talk SEC, I'm guessing you have to go back to Dave Magadan at Alabama, Frank Thomas at Auburn. That's in the 80s and the 90s. I wasn't around then to follow college baseball. It was a different era. I don't think the competition was probably as good. But all I know is for the last 20 years, if you said who's the best player in the SEC in that time, I would say Dylan Cruz.
Would
Skeens,
Dansby, would Dansby Swanson be on the same list of like accomplishments, like talent, MLB draft prospect, championship rings? Like, is Dansby in the category?
He's in a different category because he didn't play his freshman year. I mean, he played, but he got hurt in March and was a reserve. And so, I mean, Cruz was a freshman All-American, and just being able to have that extra year. I mean, it's not close between those two. Now, if you're making a list of guys I've seen play, and especially at Vandy, Swanson would be on the list of non-pitching guys, probably number one. But missing that year kind of hurt when you only get 3 years to start with. To Skeens, I would say most dominant pitching season I've ever seen. Here's a kid who could throw you a complete game in an era where if a guy gives you 6, you feel like you're lucky. The velo, I remember the Tennessee game, Braden, you probably watched that, but I think he was bumping 102 and had 2 other pitches that were working. I mean, he's 6'7". He threw 120 pitches plus twice in Omaha. I mean, goodness gracious, you name it, he had it. I mean, he only had like 2 off days all year that I remember. They had the South Carolina game where he gave up 2 early home runs, I think, to a lineup that can hit him in a park where they can get out. And then it rained for 2 hours and he didn't come back. And there was one other start he had that was more ordinary. It wasn't awful, but I mean, everything else, he just aced every other test. I've never, I mean, there was talk last night on the broadcast that when could he pitch in the majors? And I mean, like, why would you not plug him into a rotation tomorrow? I don't know what he would need at this point. Now, that's almost never the way it works, for whatever reason, maybe with the new rules around baseball that they agreed to with prospects and such. Maybe it plays out a little differently, but yeah, those 2 guys are great. And look, in terms of history, I was thinking about this last night. Sometimes you get national championship teams that win it, that they win it, but sometimes it's Fresno State 09,
Oregon State,
which was well, I mean, Oregon State 2018, that's probably on the list. I think that team had single-digit losses, but it also played in the Pac-12, which isn't the SEC. I thought Vandy 2019 was sort of my default pick as best college team I've seen, because not only it won the World Series, I think it won 59 games. It won the SEC, it won the tournament. It kind of pulled the whole – and plus was preseason 1, I think, and the number 2 seeded. Like every box you wanted to check, that team hit. LSU, I think, would be in that category, probably a better hitting team. The pitching is kind of weird because you had Skeens that was so much of their pitching, right? Like, I don't know if that LSU staff was as deep as that Vandy staff, but I don't know that Vandy had a pitcher as good as Skeens did either. Even as great as Rocker was he Paul Skeens? No. But in the pitching was the question, right? Like, remember, this is the team that lost to Mississippi State, the 8th or 9th series of the year, because nobody could get it out. But then you saw in Omaha, it kind of came together. Thatcher Hurd pitched well. He's probably a major league pitcher in the future. They got 4 or 5 guys, Floyd, Ackenhausen, Herring, Guidry pitched well out of the bullpen. Like, you need about 6 guys if you've got one guy like Skeens, and they got it. So the things that you would pick flaws with LSU for kind of came together at the end. I think it's on that short list of greatest teams all time. Yeah. If you consider body of work, there are flaws you could pick with the body of work with pitching, but I mean, when you got Tommy White and Cruz and I mean, Jared Jones pinch hit last night, Braden. I forgot he was even on the team. He had 14 home runs as a true freshman. I mean, their team was loaded.
Their kitchen sink day against Tennessee, like, their pitching was great. Like, it was elite against Tennessee. So this is going to be a weird way to ask this. I don't know what the question is. So what is the question to ask about SEC baseball? Because you now have 4 consecutive champions that are all different. You've had 3 different all SEC championship matchups in the last 5 or 6, 7 years, going back to when Florida won it, I believe, in 17. You know, when it comes to attendance, when it comes to, like, they're taking LSU alone has taken coaches from like Notre Dame and Arizona. Like, what is the question to ask about SEC baseball? Because we have this debate in football all the time. about it being the greatest in sort of every category. Like you said, checks every box. It checks every box in baseball as well. What is the right question to ask about SEC baseball and how much, like, the state of the game right now in this league?
Well, let me go back a couple steps beyond you. Okay, if Arkansas catches a foul pop-up, we've got, 6 different national champions in 6 years, and they're all from the SEC. Let me see if I'm doing my math right. Working backwards, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Vandy. Then you would go, if you gave Arkansas
with a COVID year in there, yeah.
Right. And look, I would argue that Vandy 2020 with that pitching staff didn't start well, but Florida had in Georgia was off to a crazy good start. So just unpack that for a minute. How many different teams did we just mention there that didn't include the team that had maybe the best regular season I've ever seen in Tennessee 2 years ago?
Yeah.
That was the number 1 seed to the tournament. That didn't include Alabama, which I think had a really good season and got a crummy draw. Alabama should not have been a 16. Because it was a 16 and went to Wake. That didn't include an Auburn team that's hosted 2 years in a row and gotten to Omaha a couple years in a row. I mean,
South Carolina.
You had Kentucky was good, Braden.
Yeah.
South Carolina was almost the back-to-back national title team a dozen years ago. They came back. I mean, maybe the question is can Missouri ever compete? Missouri was good until it got to the SEC.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe. I think I like the way you phrased it. And maybe it's who is poised to navigate what comes next. And what comes next to me is NIL and where that goes, because you got teams that handle it very differently. And the other thing is the conditions, Braden. You saw this in Omaha. A game can swing on one thing. I was listening on the radio to the Sunday game, and Ty Evans hit the ball. And the way they're calling it, they're thinking this is a routine fly ball. Next thing they know, they realize the ball's gotten out of the ballpark and he's hit a grand slam. And one of the first things they said is, yesterday that ball didn't reach the warning track.
Yeah.
And it said it's a 4-run swing.
The Tennessee LSU game, like you couldn't hit it to the warning track at all.
Yeah. And we've got these situations where, I mean, LSU couldn't get anybody out half the year when it went to the bullpen. It goes to Omaha, the dimensions are different, the wind's blowing in, all of a sudden LSU can pitch. You've got issues with everybody thinks the balls are juiced. The players are throwing harder than ever, so it's coming back harder. You're having exit speeds that guys in the majors aren't matching. So I think we got something with the bats and the balls that has to come. Probably, and it's a safety issue, right? Somebody's going to get hit in the head and maimed at some point.
Well, the Florida pitcher, I can't believe the Florida pitcher didn't break a leg.
Oh,
like break his femur on that one pitch in the final game. And to your point, 48 base hits from the 2 teams that won the last 2 games of the regular season. Like that reminds me of like the old, what was it, Warren Sharp days, like back in like the 90s. Is that the right name?
Yeah.
That's not the right. That's like a football guy. What's the name that I'm thinking of that hit the?
Oh, Warren Morris.
Warren Morris. Yeah, Warren Morris. Speaking of LSU,
Well, one more thing. Let's remember, and this is kind of a baseball thing. And this is the side, like when we make changes, we overreact, right? The last time SEC or the NCAA made changes to stuff, you had that, what was it, 09, 10, 11 era where balls were flying out, not quite like they are now, but close. So what did the NCAA do? It went to the high seam baseball, which was more dead, and like you couldn't hit that thing out of Omaha with a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
You had one home run in 2014 when Vandy won it 1 or 2, and it was ridiculous the other way. And now you're seeing balls. And what happened too, Braden, is when the balls got changed, people brought the fences in. So the NCAA changed the balls, and now you're seeing games with the ridiculous home run numbers.
Right.
So my question is maybe a lot of what changes with that next. And, if you go build a team like a slow pitch softball team, but then the NCAA changes it back to where the ball doesn't get out of the park and you can't cover ground in the field. There's a lot of variables there that could change. I don't know where that's going, and maybe that's the question.
As a baseball fan, I do love that the games intricacies get heightened at TD Ameritrade. Like you have to put pressure on the other team to make the high level play all the time. And if it's a close game, when it's low scoring, like I kind of like that the game is played old school in Omaha, but I don't like the variance between some of the SEC stadiums and just the wind blowing. I mean, I know that's part of sports or whatever. I get that. Let me float you an idea about what the next stage is for SEC baseball, because I think SEC baseball, it's not even like it's like football. You cannot argue that it's not the greatest in the game. Softball, you could argue the same thing. Now we're going to add Texas and Oklahoma in both sports, in which case it's going to get even better in both softball and baseball. Here's what I want, and I think there's some things brewing. I want the coaches to hate each other. That's what I want. And one of the things that I love about college baseball, so this is going to kind of fly, it's going to kind of be contradictory here. One of the things I love about going to Omaha to cover the College World Series is how baseball coaches are willing to talk about their sport in intricate detail, unlike college football or basketball. There's not state secrets. They're not paranoid schizophrenics. They're kind of willing to just explain why this guy's playing first and why that guy's on Saturday pitching. And like they're willing to go into detail about their game because we're all baseball people and we're all willing to talk about it. Certainly Tony Vitello has ruffled some feathers. We know Tim Corbin doesn't like it. We've got all these other personalities in the sport. I feel like the next phase is for like one baseball coach to start turning in other baseball coaches and like have like a Phil Fulmer subpoena thing at like SEC Media Day. Is there a way is that where NIL and the collectives and recruiting, is that going to start being heightened with portal stuff, that maybe that's the next phase of becoming like a bigger, more broadly interesting sport for more people outside of the just diehard baseball fans?
I think we're already there. I think we're getting there in a hurry. And that's one of the things I have a different, one thing that I've liked about baseball, right, is that baseball fans, it feels like, are kind of like baseball fans first. I mean, you like your team, and I guess your loyalty to your team is paramount, but I get interested in watching Aaron Judge, even though I don't like the Yankees, and kind of interested in seeing him do well. Like you will see, this used to happen at ballparks. Like a guy would go into somebody else's park and pitch a gym, and he would get a standing ovation coming out of the game just because it's baseball, and you appreciated the game for what it was. I remember talking to Tim Corbin, and I just said, this is kind of when I was new covering it, and he said, the thing that I like about it is that you don't have the other stuff that comes with football. Like the biggest scandal in baseball for a long time, and I don't even know exactly what he was talking about, but I guess it was something that went back to Michigan in the 80s when they had Larkin and Hal Morris and Chris Sabo, something with selling programs to where I guess maybe money with like that's like not even a one over the speed limit in football terms. And now you are seeing a lot of allegations. I don't think tampering's good. I understand the game, and it's sort of becoming this thing where I think we both agree that probably driving 90 in the 55 isn't good. And both of us, as we set out and leave the house today, would say, all right, I probably, for the best of everybody, ought to be driving as close to 55. But if you're on the interstate and everybody's going 90, you've got some survival choices and some safety choices to make, and that may not be the right analogy, but I feel like
I think it's good.
Baseball's kind of headed to that place where you may see some teams that are allegedly starting to drive 90 that are against it and weren't, because you have to do that to survive. I think the tampering issue, and there are coaches in the league that are calling up other kids, and it doesn't even, I don't even know that they go through intermediaries anymore. Some of them probably do.
That's my issue with, so I don't care about tampering as a concept because it happens in every single walk of human life.
Right.
Like, I don't know how one human can take another job at another company without having a conversation with somebody off the record. So I don't, tampering as a theory doesn't bother me. If a coach is directly contacting a player who is not in the portal, I think, and coaches need to name names. We've got football coaches who are like, oh, so I know for a fact so-and-so got this offer to leave my team. And like, well, no one's willing to put their name on it or put another person's name on it because everybody's kind of doing it. I don't like that part. But, the Alabama scandal, while it's, it didn't really hurt anybody per se. It wasn't like a criminal abuse scandal or something. That's higher up at Alabama. Like The coaching, it was a scandal. It was bad. It was wrong. He should be fired, but it got a lot of attention to college baseball for a while. And it means that, so I don't know. I'm trying to, it's softball is such a fun product and it's gaining so much notoriety and it's outdrawing the men's game, but the men's game is great, especially in the SEC. And so I'm just trying to figure out like, you got the greatest pitching performance in the history of the game. You got the number 1 overall pick, is one of the best players in the history of the SEC, on one of the best teams in the history of the league.
Yeah.
And I bet you ratings are solid. Not great. I bet you ratings are solid.
Okay, here's my answer to that. I'm going to go 2 different directions. I think, one, you just watched the talent on the field last night. You had maybe the first 3 picks of the draft in Skeens, Cruz, and Langford. And you got a bunch of guys. Jack Caglione could go 1 overall next year. I would bet you, Cade Curlin, some other guys on Florida. You'll see Neely and some of those guys picked high in the future. LSU's going to have Tommy White probably go in the top 10 overall next year. Thatcher Hurd's going to be a big league. The thing that's going to be interesting is 2 years from now, when they do the draft, you and I need to have this podcast, and we need to say how many guys that played in that title game ended up being first rounders, because it's going to be a big number. I think the talent itself is good enough to attract people. And now that you got the TV exposure and baseball going more in a mainstreamish direction, I think the game itself is good enough without needing all the sideshows. I'm going to offset it with this. Mike Leach said something in his last media day that I thought was one of the more profound quotes I've ever heard. I don't know how much it caught everybody else's attention, but it caught mine. And he said, what if you took the NFL today and you gave it unlimited year-to-year free agency, and you gave it all these things, an unlimited salary cap? What kind of product would you have? And the point that he's making from that is pretty obvious. That's the direction we're headed in baseball. I think we need some guardrails. I'm not against kids getting paid. I think the NCAA kind of created this problem with the whole, go back and look at the Jim Tressel thing 10 or 12 years, and like how completely ridiculous is that now? Yeah. And so I think the NCAA always, it overcorrects, and then it just said, screw it, we're going to let this go wherever it goes. And maybe in some ways that's a good thing long term, just to see what people are willing to pay and what the parameters are. But when you have these uneven things, when you have tampering, I don't think that there's some things in there that are good long term for the sport. And let me ask you something: if you're a coach and you feel like you need to play the tampering game, you're calling a kid on another team to gauge his interest in the season. In the back of your head, are you not going, well, how loyal is this kid going to be to me? Let's say I bring him in as a freshman. Is somebody else? I think you have a mess. I think Leach hit the nail on the head. And I think some semblance of organization and guardrails and rule. And look, this didn't happen in the NBA and the NFL. They figure out a way, like if there's tampering charges, there's penalties to pay. We need to get to a place where I think it can be more like that. I don't know exactly what all that looks like, but ideally that's where it would be.
I mean, to answer your question, they have a legal tampering period. Like that's what it's literally called in the NFL, which I find completely hilarious and ironic. I don't think you can stop. Like all these kids, especially in baseball and football, all these kids grow up on the same circuits. They're all running in the same travel leagues. They're all running in the same, all the strength and conditioning coaches know each other. All the assistant coaches know each other. Like it doesn't have to be and again, I would argue this is exactly the same in real life, that like no one walks into their boss's office and quits their job without having already had a conversation with someone else about their next job. Like that is just not how that's not how capitalism works. And so I think we have to accept some of that in college athletics. Do I think, to your point, the NCAA had 25 years to fix this problem and just punted on the whole thing the entire time? Yeah, I think they intentionally walked the entire, NIL, pay for play, whatever you want to call it, issue, and just and they created this mess themselves. So if I blame anybody, I don't blame the players, I don't blame the coaches, I blame the NCAA. We need to move on to Vanderbilt, but I do think it's fascinating to watch. Like, what is the game? I agree with you. The product is elite. You cannot argue that the product is not the best. And I am far more interested in college baseball than my own New York Mets now, just because Major League Baseball is like, it's just so watered down from night to night to night to night to night. I love the postseason, but I can watch I love the scheduling of the SEC baseball where I can go, all right, what weekend big series do I have to watch this weekend? And it's the 3 games and it's 2 elite teams. Maybe it's 2 or 3 series in the SEC that I'm going to watch. It's sort of like soccer in that it's scheduled pretty regimentally, kind of like college football is every Saturday. I think there's plenty there, but it's I don't know if it ever gets out of the region. But hey, the region is pretty freaking dominant. The region's pretty dominant right now. We'll see if all these problems are affecting football, which brings us to the Vanderbilt Commodores and Clark Lee. And I want to take a 10,000-foot view real fast first before we drill down a little bit further. And I do appreciate your time, Chris. There's a quote in our magazine in Athlon Sports that says that the defense is just Lee's fingerprint. The offensive identity's all over the map. But here's the quote that I want to say. They want to fight you. That's the sign of a good culture. When you come to play a 2 or 3 win team and they scrap for 4 quarters and play hard, they're getting better. There are no shortcuts, it seems, with Clark Lee in terms of what he's building. I don't know what that means long term. I don't know what the final ceiling is for that, but it seems like he's building it the correct way. Is this the right approach for the Vanderbilt Commodores football team?
Yeah, I mean, look, Braden, he took over a bad situation. I've said this. I've maybe said it to you before. Anytime a coach takes over at Vanderbilt, it's basically always a rebuild, except in the case of when James Franklin left. It was a little different situation, although they had plenty of rebuild to do there in a different sense because of the Vandenberg issue.
Sure.
I think the one Clark had was worse than most Vanderbilt rebuilds for a bunch of reasons. We could do a whole podcast on that alone. But bottom line on the field is they don't have the talent. Like, you watch them, their dudes in the trenches have not been what everybody else's are, even lower level SEC teams. Their skill position guys do not have the speed and athleticism that everybody else's have. And they're still not there yet. They're closing the gap through recruiting a little bit, but they're never going to be LSU. They're never going to be Alabama. And one thing Clark Lee did that he showed us at practice last year, their whole thing was, hey, when a guy goes down, we want 8 guys in the pile, basically. And we want to be the team that when you play us, you walk out of the stadium going, man, that was a physical fight. And I think if you're hearing coaches say that on the other end, it feels like maybe he's starting to accomplish something. Now, look, their defense was awful last year. I mean, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee combined to score 160 points on them. It was pretty bad. And there's no getting around that. But I think that attitude and mentality he brought to it about the things they can control, which was that, started to pay off. I mean, they beat Florida and Kentucky at the end of the year in games that I didn't really see coming. 2 teams with much better talent beat Kentucky on the road. And look, both teams at that point in time had stuff to play for and were playing well. Florida, I thought when they played Florida, was about as hot as any team in the country outside of Tennessee, LSU, Alabama, or at least in the conference, playing really well, and that they got Florida that day. I think it goes to show they still got – the scoreboard showed you they've still got miles to go. I think those 2 games showed you that he's got something in the approach that allowed them to win 2 games that they really, frankly, had no business winning.
I honestly, I think it's the highest compliment you can pay a team is that, like, that team – like, you can't do anything about talent in general when you're talking Bama versus, or Georgia versus Vanderbilt or whatever. But the fact that you can be down, 45 points and still playing your ass off, like that's as high a compliment as I think you can pay a coach in terms of what he's putting into the players sort of mentally. I was going to ask you, you kind of addressed it there. The 2 wins, it shades the season in a totally different way. Is that more of a function of all of that stuff taking root? Or is it, to your point, more of a function of, Will Levis was completely hurt. The offensive line was atrocious. Florida was kind of, you said it, they're not exactly limping to the finish, but that was one of the worst Florida teams we're going to see in quite some time. Do you think it's a function of all of that? What's the answer to that question?
It's been interesting the first 2 years. Clark Lee gets criticized for having some boring press conferences and using the same cliches. And one of them he used was staying in the fight. And they kept talking about playing our best. And it sounded stupid when they're on a 26-game conference losing streak. But you look up and all of a sudden they've won a couple of games. And I think the not focusing on, okay, what's the scoreboard? if they're focusing on that, I'm not sure they win either of those games, Braden, because that gets to be really disheartening.
Yeah.
But pointing out the things we did well and the things that need improvement, I think that's what kept them on track. I think it's that and building a culture that's, I think, a pretty good culture. I think they're very sensitive in terms of who are we going to take? Are they right locker room people? I think those things pay off. To answer Kentucky specifically, yeah, Will Levis couldn't move, and his offensive line couldn't block me and you. And even Vandy got a pass rush that game, which they didn't do most games. So sure, that had something to do with it. But Kentucky was still more talented than they were. And I think them winning that had a lot to say about Clark Lee.
Offensively, they're one of only two teams in the conference that return both their coordinator and their starting quarterback. I'm counting A.J. Swan as the starting quarterback. We know Clark Lee's identity on defense. We've just talked about it. But offensively, even the opposing anonymous scouting report is sort of like, we're not really sure what they are. They're all over the map. Some of that's been the in and out of the quarterback. They've had, 4 different guys start for Clark Lee. What is there some stability now with the return of a quarterback and the return of a coordinator? Again, LSU is the only other team that has that in the entire conference.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important. I'd go a step further. They have got the same offensive and defensive coordinator, and if you want to go a step further, special teams. And I think that's the first time in, 6-7 years they've returned the same offensive and defensive coordinator in back-to-back years. It's hard to be, and especially at a place like Vanderbilt, like at Georgia, you could probably get away with that just because you go and get dudes and, they could run the wing tee if they wanted to and just beat people on talent. At Vanderbilt, it's not the same. I think the stability has really helped them. I think giving A.J. Swan that job early in the year, letting him grow into it. He's a really talented kid. Almost all his receivers are back. They lost Ray Davis, which is going to hurt some. Their line is stable. They've got a lot of the same guys back. They've got 7 or 8 guys who started. Again, talent gap between them and the rest of the league is there. But in terms of stability and some continuity, that's where they might be able to make up some ground.
So I hammered the over on 2.5 last year, made my money early in the year. I would hammer the over on 3.5 this year again.
Yeah.
The question is, 5-7 growth is a bowl game. I think that's a lot to ask with this schedule. First of all, what does the stadium look like that they're going to play in? And number 2, what do fans like if they go 4-8 with an SEC win and maybe they lose to Wake and they win 3 non-conference games? That could still be progress for this team in terms of getting better. What are fans expecting, and what is the stadium going to look like?
There's a lot of talk about bowl games. And it's interesting. You can feel like the first couple of years, again, it was all this, let's be our best Vanderbilt. There was no talk of tangible win-loss goals. This spring, I was over there for the first day I was over there. It was bowl game. So to me, that internal shift to where, and with Clark Lee, nothing's going to be an accident. They're not going to just go out and shoot their mouths off about bowl games if that's not coming from the top. And you heard it from players, you heard it from him, you heard it from assistants. So that shift in expectations to me is significant. I'm with you. I would take the over on 3.5. Look, they could get 4 right off the bat, depending on how ready Wake is with the quarterback change and where Vanderbilt is with defense. But, if you start looking at individual games, it's hard to say this is one in the league where they should be favored. Florida's one that I got a lot of questions about Florida, and they've actually played reasonably well in Gainesville in recent years at times. Kentucky's going to be better. Tennessee's going to be a tough get. South Carolina is one that you could say maybe if things go the right way, but that's always at the time in November. I think that's when that game is, where Carolina's playing better, and they haven't won that one since 2008. But like last year, if you'd said where are they going to get 2 league wins, yeah, but they got him. So it's kind of one of these things where on the aggregate, I can see it. When you start having to name names, it gets a little tougher.
Well, and the Ole Miss game is always bonkers between these two teams. Like, it never goes the way you expect it to go. South Carolina is going to play such a tough schedule that could actually be a good time to get them if they're beaten up and have lost a bunch of games. That, you get Kentucky and Missouri at home to start the schedule. You almost beat Missouri last year. You beat Kentucky last year. I'm with you on hammering the over. Thank you for your time. I'll let you go on this, but please explain to people what the actual home game is going to look like If you look at photos right now of the stadium, for those that do not know, a big chunk of it is missing, where they're doing a huge renovation, which is a great positive because they are investing in facilities and in football. But it is going to make for a kind of a weird situation, I assume, this fall, right?
Yeah, I think the big winners this year are going to be ticket scalpers on SEC game days, because you've got a large hole in the end zone. It was a big pile of debris last I was over there, which has been probably 3 weeks. You've got a pile of debris in the other end zone too, which there weren't a lot of seats there to begin with. But yeah, they're doing a complete overhaul of the stadium. There's going to be 2 large buildings in there by the start of the 25 season. There's been some talk of, are they going to be able to play every game in there? I guess they'd have a soccer stadium at their disposal, and the Titans perhaps, but I've not heard any real traction on them having to move games lately. But yeah, capacity is going to be much less. If you are an out-of-town fan wanting to come to a game, I wouldn't necessarily count on a ticket as being a guarantee. You might want to nail that down before you make the road trip.
I don't know. November 4th is after the Nashville SC Soccer Club stops playing. So Geodis Park, the largest soccer-only stadium in America, November 4th, hosting Auburn. That could be pretty fun. Over there at the new stadium. So no, Vanderbilt's committed and they're investing, which is great. The team is getting better, which is also great. And we'll see what happens on the field. Chris Lee, thank you so much for joining us, man. We do appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks, Braden.
That was Chris Lee, of course, VandySports.com, Southeastern 14. My question is, Erin, as he alluded to, ticket sales for Vanderbilt football games for road teams, which generally is a big part of the audience. Not trying to be rude here, but that's a part of the audience.
You're not being rude. Right now,
there's no south end zone. There's a whole portion of the stadium missing.
Correct.
And they didn't have a north end zone before. They had a couple of bleachers and a little patch of grass back there, which they're going to fix as part of the renovation.
Correct.
But it is going to be a weird scene to watch games in 2023 on West End. It's going to be weird.
I know. I don't really know what to think. I spent a lot of time in that stadium, but yeah, it's going to be, I'll be totally transparent. I haven't had a chance to hear this interview with Chris Lee. So normally I do get to before we're on the show. So can you tell me a little bit about what he said about ticket sales?
Oh, just that if you're a road fan, you're going to have a tougher time getting tickets because there's a lot fewer seats.
Yes.
So if you're coming in, and I was just looking at their schedule, you've got Kentucky and Missouri at home, which are 2 very actually winnable games.
Yeah.
But everybody looks to have a trip to Nashville. That's what everybody in the SEC. That's also part of the problem for Vanderbilt. It's not just.
It is very much part of the problem.
No disrespect to all you lovely folks in Bryan College Station, but no one circles College Station as a tourist destination when they're planning out their travel in the regular season. Everyone circles Nashville. You've got Georgia. You got Georgia and Auburn coming to town, 2 massive fan bases with a ton of alumni in the city, and then you got Kentucky, Missouri. So those 4 games, I imagine, especially Georgia and Auburn, that's going to be hard ticket to get if you're coming to Nashville. So because
if you're a Vanderbilt fan and you normally go to games, please go to games, because if you don't, it will be even more overwhelmingly the away team.
Yeah. And again, without the end zone, I don't know exactly how many seats that removes, but let's say it was 38,000 before. It's probably down to 30,000 now. So it just makes it more difficult for and it's personally, it's just going to be weird. It's just going to be weird to look at the stadium without either end zone. It's going to look Oregon State. It's going to look
like a glorified high school stadium.
Well, maybe, but Oregon State famously the last couple of years, because they've been renovating their stadium, it only has one half. They only have one half of their stadium.
Super weird.
It's super weird. And they won 10 games last year.
Well, I hope we can tear a page out of their book.
Wild times. But hammer the over 3.5 Vanderbilt. I like what Clark Lee's doing.
Yeah.
Those Commodores are dangerous every single game because they play their asses off. And that is as high a compliment as you can, as other coaches can pay to Clark Lee and his administration. Erin, where can people find you?
The Erin Dugan on Twitter, Erin_Dugan on the gram. And you?
You can get to me at Braden Gall at 440 Sports. Send us the teams that you like in the SEC. They're not your favorite teams. I want to know, who do you enjoy rooting for? Genuinely, in any sport, who do you like rooting for outside of your favorite team, but within the conference? So I understand there's some psychological dynamic there, but I'd love to know, because for me, in LSU. I don't know why. It's just always LSU. The colors, the vibe, the energy, the uniforms, the history, the people, the food. I don't know. It's always been LSU. Sorry, Bama. Sorry, Bama.
It would never be Bama.
You're too Yankees for me. Like the Bama's too like you're not allowed to have a mustache or